Thank you, Sean. It's a great pleasure to be here. I always enjoy coming to Birkbeck. I was fortunate enough to join Saatchi and Saatchi when they were very small and they grew very big, and I grew along with them. And people used to think that Saatchi had the answer to everything, including the sporting authorities. And that's how I got involved in football. We did the first campaign ever for a football club for Tottenham Hotspur. And then subsequently we worked for the FA and the Football League. And then when I left the agency, I continued my work as a consultant. And apart from the governing bodies, I'd also worked for a number of clubs, as diverse from Manchester United to Galatasaray, specialising in broadcasting rights. But it's not a full-time occupation, particularly if you're a consultant who tells people what you think they need to know rather than what they want to hear. So I often have to fill up my time, and I do that by writing. And I tend to concentrate on the business and politics of football. And because I have access at certain clubs, I've written books particularly about Arsenal and Tottenham Hotspur, and the latest book is about Arsenal. Well, first of all, you've got to remember that I might say this, mightn't I? But my plan only was followed in the sense of I showed them how to get more money. Yes, it went like this, that the Premier League would not have happened without the sanction of the FA, and I persuaded the FA to back the Premier League on the premise that it would be good for the top clubs, but more importantly for English football from the top, the national team, to the bottom at grassroots. But what happened was that I think I cared more about it than the FA, and they couldn't wait to show me the door. However, 20 years on, we look at the Premier League and it is the biggest, the richest, the most popular league in the world. By any criterion, it's an undoubted success, except when you look back at why it was created, it hasn't helped the clubs beyond those who are in the Premier League, the 20 clubs. And you cannot measure a country's football strength by 20 clubs alone. So while the clubs have gone from strength to strength, the national team has laboured, and everybody under the Premier League has also laboured. And this is a great shame because more people go and watch professional football in England in more divisions than in any other country. People also forget that it took us a number of years before we came to terms with the requirements of the Champions League. But now, because we no longer have an English league, but we have a foreign league, English teams, of course, dominate all of the European competitions. So on a club basis, the Premier League has been nothing but a success for the 20 member clubs, and even those who have shared a brief touch of glory, they have benefited from it. But for the majority of others, those who are semi-professional and those who are professional in the Football League, it has been, if not an unmitigated disaster, it's been a severe handicap, and they only succeed in spite of the system, not because of it. Really nothing, because it's clubs that call the shots these days. You've even got the club associations in Europe asking for more and more power from FIFA, and they'll get it. You've also got the threat only recently of one or two big clubs suggesting that there ought to be fewer domestic games and more international games. So the European Super League is a spectre that's hanging over the game. So what can be done to help the national team? Only if there were fewer games at home, and only if there was somehow a limit put on the number of foreign players. Because if we contrast England with Spain and Germany, who are the two most successful European teams in international competition, 3/4 of their players play at home. Less than 40% of English players play in the Premier League. And until that situation is rectified, the national team will always struggle and will always be at a disadvantage against not just the Spaniards, the Germans, but also the Italians as well. If we could follow the German model, it would be a start. They recognise that life is about more than 20 clubs. They have 38 clubs. They have the equivalent of Premier League 1 and Premier League 2, Bundesliga 1, Bundesliga 2. So you have 38 clubs that matter. More importantly, perhaps in the long-term future, you have 38 academies that matter. So what happens is you have a lot more fluidity in the system. Clubs go up and down, players go up and down, coaches go up and down. There's a life after relegation from the Premier League, which is exemplified by what happened in the 90s. In 3 successive seasons, Kaiserslautern were relegated, promoted and won the title. You know, that's like Sunderland winning the title this year. It's not going to happen. So the best thing that we can do is to create Premier League 1 and Premier League 2. It will decimate the Football League, but at least if the Football League recognise their strengths, which are local and parochial, then what we could have is strong national divisions, Premier League 1, Premier League 2, Football League 1, maybe Football League 2, so you've got 4 national divisions, and then go regional at the bottom. That would help the quality of football throughout the leagues. It would also help the growth of young players, particularly English players and players who have grown up in this country, and it would benefit the game as a whole and ultimately the national team. Well, from the beginning of the Premier League to now, they have got a state-of-the-art stadium, they've got the genius of a manager, they turn huge profits and huge revenues, yet they are not as successful as they could be, because they haven't, either on the playing side, challenged the manager and given him the reinforcement he needs, like other clubs who Arsenal compare themselves with. And secondly, in commercial terms, they are lagging far behind Manchester United. So in a nutshell, Arsenal as a brand has a lot of potential, but it's underdeveloped. And what needs to happen is Arsenal need to go away from the self-sufficiency model and to speculate to accumulate. It doesn't matter, Sean, whether the Premier League is debt-ridden or it's owned by foreigners. The fact is that more people watch the Premier League as a competition across the world than practically any other competition. So the Premier League is set to go from strength to strength. In fact, you could say you haven't seen anything yet, particularly if the Premier League get to terms with branding. And the anomaly that they have got to overcome is that in America there is a system which is called league think. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Provided the Premier League look at that and realise that they can't copy that, because what matters in England is the clubs. So we've got club think. And if they recognise that they mustn't undermine Manchester United and Chelsea because these are the great drivers, but make sure that these are the spearheads of your competition. So if they recognise that these brands can develop and then overall they can support them with the brand of the Premier League will go from strength to strength. Well, his talent can be epitomised by what he did when they moved to the new stadium. The club prioritised the building of a stadium over the building of a team, and Wenger said, don't worry, we'll be okay. I can develop through these youth players that I'm bringing through, and we'll be okay. And indeed they were, only falling at the final hurdle. And even that could have been avoided if Wenger had done what other major managers do, which is to reinforce his own ability with others who could maybe compensate for the few weaknesses that he does have. However, the game has now moved on. Manchester City have arrived, and it's not just that no one has spent so much, so quickly and to such great effect in English football as Manchester City, but it's what they've caused other people to respond to. And they've got to come to terms with the fact that the game has changed, they have to spend, and what happened in the summer was an example of really a rude wake-up call for them. It was desperate times calling for desperate measures. As Wenger himself says, a club that would sell Fabregas and Nasri can rightfully be accused of lacking ambition. Well, that's exactly what happened. And what needs to happen now is there needs to be a change at board level. I'll give you a scenario. Self-sufficiency doesn't work, so Stan Kroenke realises that he has to invest. What better way of doing that is to ensure that the American influence is maintained, so maybe one or two other marketing experts are brought on board, and to balance that, red and white. Alisher Usmanov comes on board, and he is as good as his word and invests in the team. And if he comes on board, why not bring David Dean back to help his friend Arsene Wenger? Because if Dean had been around during the summer, or even the previous summer, Arsenal would not have been in the fix they are, simply because he would have forced Wenger to go the extra mile. Don't worry, Arsene, about the money. I'll look after that. If you look at the revenues, they're astronomical. The Premier League is the most successful league, certainly in Europe, way in front of the second league, which is the Bundesliga. But we could take a lesson from the Bundesliga, which has developed commercially and as a brand and as a benefit for the national team. So in summation, the Premier League has been fine for the 20 members of this select club, but it's been maybe a disadvantage for those who are outside the club, including the national team.